What would you do if your children vanished in the time it takes to make a cup of coffee? Picture this. It's a quiet Tuesday morning in rural Nova Scotia. The birds are chirping, the forest is peaceful, and two young children, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, are playing innocently in their family home. Within hours they would disappear without a trace, launching one of Canada's most controversial missing persons cases. But here's what makes this case different from every other missing children's story you've heard. It wasn't a stranger who may have cost these children their lives. It wasn't a system failure or a natural disaster. According to investigators, community members, and true crime experts analyzing this case, it was a single decision made by their own mother that may have sealed their fate forever. Have you ever been in a crisis where time seemed to slow down, but you couldn't think clearly? Have you ever made a split-second decision that you immediately regretted? What about when you're responsible for someone else's safety? When your choices don't just affect you, but the most vulnerable people in your care? Most of us have been there. That moment when panic sets in, when logic seems to abandon us, when we freeze instead of act. But for Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, one such moment of hesitation would become what experts now call a fatal mistake, a 2-hour delay that might have been the difference between life and death for her children. Here's the problem that haunts this case. When children go missing, the first few hours are absolutely critical. Search and rescue experts call them the golden hours, the window of time, when immediate action can mean the difference between a happy reunion and a tragedy that destroys families forever. Every minute that passes reduces the chances of a successful recovery. Every delayed decision allows a wider search radius, colder trails, and diminishing hope. So what happens when a parent, the person most responsible for protecting their children, makes decisions that investigators believe directly contributed to that critical time being lost? Today, we're going to uncover exactly what happened in those missing hours on May 2nd, 2025. We're going to examine every decision, every inconsistency, and every moment that led to what many consider the most preventable tragedy in recent Canadian history. You'll learn the warning signs that everyone missed, the crucial mistakes that compounded a crisis, and most importantly, the life-saving lessons that every parent, guardian, and community member needs to understand. Before we dive into this heartbreaking case, hit that like button if you believe every parent should hear this story, and subscribe, because we're about to uncover decisions that changed everything. This isn't just another true crime story, it's a case study in how our choices in the most critical moments can define the rest of our lives. Because by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why sometimes the greatest danger to our children doesn't come from strangers in the shadows. It comes from the split-second decisions we make when we're supposed to be protecting them the most. To understand how everything went so catastrophically wrong, we need to step into the world of the Sullivan family, a world shaped by isolation, struggle, and the kind of rural challenges that most people never have to face. Picture the remote reaches of Pictou County, Nova Scotia. This isn't the postcard-perfect countryside you might imagine. This is the kind of rural isolation where your nearest neighbor might be miles away, where cell phone service cuts in and out, and where emergency response times can stretch into dangerous territory simply because of geography. The Sullivan family home sat on Gairloch Road in Lansdowne Station, a modest dwelling surrounded by dense, sprawling forests that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. These weren't friendly neighborhood woods, where children build tree forts and parents don't worry. These were the kind of thick, unforgiving wilderness areas where search dogs lose scent trails, where helicopters can't penetrate the canopy, and where a small child could vanish without a trace in minutes. But here's what makes this family's story even more complex. Malaya Brooks Murray wasn't navigating these challenges alone, yet in many ways, she was more isolated than ever. Malaya had been building what she hoped would be a stable life for her children. After years of personal upheaval, the father of Lilly and Jack, Cody Sullivan, had walked away from the family 3 years earlier, leaving Malaya to shoulder the immense responsibility of single parenthood while dealing with her own emotional and financial struggles. Think about that for a moment. Have you ever tried to manage a crisis while you're already overwhelmed? Have you ever had to make critical decisions when you're already running on empty, already stretched to your breaking point? Malaya had found a new partner in Daniel Martel, who stepped into the role of stepfather to Lilly and Jack. Together they were also raising baby Meadow, creating a blended family dynamic that added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. While Daniel would later prove cooperative with investigators, the family structure itself created what psychologists call diffused responsibility, a situation where it's not always clear who's in charge during a crisis. But let's talk about the children at the center of this tragedy, because they weren't just statistics or case files. They were real kids with personalities, dreams, and futures that were cut short. 6-year-old Lilly was described by family and neighbors as a bright, curious child who loved exploring and asking questions. She was the kind of kid who noticed everything, who wanted to understand how the world worked. In the surveillance footage we'll examine later, you can see her alert expression, her eyes taking in everything around her. Lilly was protective of her younger brother and had that natural leadership quality that often emerges in oldest children. 4-year-old Jack was the family's little adventurer. Bold, energetic, and fearless, in the way that only 4-year-olds can be. He was the child who would wander off to examine an interesting bug or chase a butterfly without thinking about consequences. In a safe environment, this curiosity was endearing. In the wilderness surrounding their home, it would become tragically dangerous. Here's the crucial detail that everyone seems to have overlooked. These children were not typical suburban kids who stayed within clearly defined boundaries. They were rural children who had grown up with relative freedom to explore their environment. But that same familiarity with their surroundings that made them confident explorers also made them more likely to venture further than they should when curiosity struck. The community around Lansdowne Station knew the Brooks-Murray family, but in the way that rural communities often know each other, from a distance with respect for privacy, without the constant oversight that might exist in denser neighborhoods. Neighbors described Malaya as someone who kept to herself, managing her household with a determination, but without the extensive support network that might have made all the difference during a crisis. Extended family members, including Cody Sullivan's mother Belinda Gray, provided sporadic accounts that painted a picture of a woman who was struggling not necessarily with neglect or abuse, but with the overwhelming pressure of raising children in challenging circumstances while dealing with her own unresolved trauma from relationship failures and financial stress. And here's the life lesson that's crucial to understand. Isolation breeds decision-making vulnerabilities. When you're already managing stress, when you don't have strong support systems, when you're used to handling everything yourself, you're more likely to make poor choices during emergencies. You're more likely to hesitate when you should act, more likely to second-guess yourself when decisive action is needed. This family background isn't an excuse for what happened next. It's context that helps us understand how a perfect storm of circumstances created the conditions for tragedy, because sometimes the most dangerous situations aren't created by evil intentions or criminal minds. Sometimes they're created by good people making bad decisions under pressure they weren't equipped to handle. The Sullivan family was living in a beautiful but unforgiving environment, managing complex family dynamics, dealing with economic stress, and raising children who were naturally curious and adventurous. It was a situation that required constant vigilance, clear emergency protocols, and immediate decisive action if anything went wrong. As we'll see, when that crisis moment finally arrived, the very isolation and stress that had shaped their daily lives would become the factors that turned a manageable emergency into an unspeakable tragedy. Sometimes the most significant days of our lives start out feeling completely ordinary. May 1st, 2025, began like any other spring day in the Sullivan household, except for one small detail that would later take on enormous significance. It was a teacher professional development day, which meant Lilly and Jack were home from school. These are the kind of random schedule changes that parents deal with all the time. The unexpected day off that throws off routines and requires last-minute childcare decisions. For Malaya, this wasn't just an inconvenience. 6-year-old Lilly had developed a mild cough, so keeping her home seemed like the responsible parenting choice. Have you ever made that calculation as a parent or caregiver? Your child isn't severely ill, but they're not quite at 100%, so you make the safe choice to keep them home and monitor the situation. It seemed reasonable. It seemed responsible. But in hindsight, this decision meant that both children would be home on the day that everything changed, creating the conditions for what was about to unfold. But here's what makes May 1st so haunting. We have actual footage of the family together. Not speculation, not conflicting witness accounts. Actual surveillance footage that shows us the last time Lilly and Jack Sullivan were definitively safe and accounted for. The footage comes from a local store in New Glasgow, near Highland Square Mall. In these grainy but clear images, we see what appears to be a normal family outing. Malaya and Daniel Martel are shopping with baby Meadow, and both Lilly and Jack are visible, moving around the store in the way children do, examining things, staying close to the adults, behaving like typical kids on an errand with their parents. But here's where it gets unsettling. When you know what's coming next, this ordinary footage becomes tragic. Crime scene analysts who have studied this video frame by frame have noted details that seemed insignificant at the time, but now carry enormous weight. Watch Lilly's body language in the footage. She appears subdued, not her usual curious, energetic self. Some observers have noted that she stays closer to the adults than usual, almost as if she's seeking security or comfort. Jack, typically the family's little adventurer, seems less animated than neighbors remember him being in public settings. Were these children already sensing some kind of tension in their household? Were there family stresses that hadn't yet exploded into crisis, but were creating an undercurrent of anxiety that even young children could feel? Here's what multiple community members reported in interviews after the disappearance. There was something different about the family dynamic that day. Not dramatic, not obvious, but subtly off, in the way that people who know you well can sometimes detect. The store clerk who served them later told investigators that while the parents seemed normal, there was an air of distraction about the interaction, the kind of subtle tension that might indicate underlying stress, financial pressure, relationship strain, or simply the exhaustion that comes from managing a complicated household situation. But here's the crucial detail that makes this footage so important. It provides the definitive timeline. This surveillance video is proof positive that both children were safe, healthy, and with their family as of May 1st. Whatever happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan occurred after this point, within the following 24 hours. As the family returned home from their shopping trip, neighbors reported seeing the familiar sight of the family vehicle pulling into their driveway on Gallock Road. Everything appeared normal. The children helped carry bags into the house. The evening routine proceeded as usual, but was it really routine? In investigations like this, seemingly normal details often reveal themselves to be anything but normal when examined closely. Daniel Martel later told investigators that the evening of May 1st proceeded without incident. The children had dinner, played for a while, and went to bed at their usual times. Malaya corroborated this account, describing a quiet evening at home with no unusual events or behaviors. Yet other details would later emerge that called this peaceful narrative into question. Phone records, for instance, showed several calls between family members that evening, calls that weren't typical of the family's usual communication patterns. Social media activity from Malaya's accounts showed posts and deletions that suggested a level of agitation or uncertainty that contradicted the calm evening she described. And here's the life lesson that everyone needs to understand. The day before a crisis often contains warning signs that we only recognize in retrospect. That subtle tension, that feeling that something is off, those small behavioral changes that we dismiss as temporary stress. Sometimes these are our early warning systems, trying to tell us that we need to pay closer attention. Have you ever looked back at a situation and realized that the signs were there all along? Have you ever wished you had trusted your instincts about something that felt wrong, even when you couldn't put your finger on exactly what it was? The evening of May 1st ended with two parents believing their children were safe in their beds, in a home they had worked hard to make secure, surrounded by the rural peace they had chosen for their family life. But in that house on Gallock Road, something was building toward a crisis that would test every decision-making skill this family possessed. The ordinary evening of May 1st was the calm before a storm that would change everything, not just for the Sullivan family, but for their entire community and everyone who would later study this case. As Malaya and Daniel settled in for what they thought would be another routine night, they had no idea that in less than 12 hours they would face the kind of emergency that every parent fears most, and that the decisions they made in those crucial hours would define the rest of their lives. May 2nd, 2025, started like thousands of other mornings in the Sullivan household. But by 10 a.m., it would become the day that shattered a family and launched one of Canada's most controversial missing persons investigations. Let's reconstruct this morning hour by hour, because the timeline isn't just important, it's everything. In missing children cases, every minute matters, and as we'll see, the decisions made during these crucial hours would become the focus of intense scrutiny and criticism. 6 and 7 a.m. The normal morning routine. According to both Malalia and Daniel's later statements to police, the morning began routinely. Baby Meadow woke up first, as babies often do, requiring feeding and attention. Lily and Jack were still sleeping, which wasn't unusual for children during a non-school day. Daniel reported that he heard movement from the children's rooms around 7 a.m. The sounds of kids waking up, getting out of bed, typical morning noises that parents become attuned to over time. This detail would later become significant because it established that both children were alive, awake, and in the house, as of 7 a.m. 7 Seridal 8 Serid a.m. The children are active and accounted for. This is where the timeline becomes more detailed, because this hour represents the last time multiple witnesses can account for both children being safe in the house. Malia later told investigators that Lily came into the master bedroom several times during this hour, sometimes to ask questions, sometimes just to check in with the adults, the way children do when they're not quite ready to start their day independently. This behavior was completely normal for Lily, who was naturally social and liked to know what the adults were doing. Jack, meanwhile, was reported to be in the kitchen area, making the kinds of noises that a 4-year-old makes when exploring or playing, opening cabinets, moving chairs, talking to himself in the way that children do when they're creating imaginary games. Here's the crucial detail. Both parents reported hearing both children during this time period, not seeing them constantly, which would be unusual in a household where parents are managing multiple children and morning routines, but hearing them, which provided ongoing confirmation that both kids were safely in the house. 8 Serad, 9 a.m. The critical hour. This is where the timeline starts to become problematic, and where the first questions about the parents' account begin to emerge. According to Malaya and Daniel, the children continued to be active in the house during this hour, but their precise whereabouts became less clear. This isn't necessarily unusual. Most parents don't maintain constant visual contact with school-aged children in their own homes, especially when managing other responsibilities like caring for an infant. But here's where the account starts to raise red flags. Both parents report that during this hour, they began to notice that the children seemed quieter, not absent, not gone, just quieter than usual. In retrospect, this detail is chilling. Were Lily and Jack already outside the house during this hour? Were they beginning to wander away from safety, or were they still inside, but engaged in activities that wouldn't generate the normal sounds of children at play? 9:00 The hour that changed everything. This is the hour that has generated the most controversy and criticism in the entire case. Because somewhere during these 60 minutes, 2 children went from being safe in their home to being completely missing, and their parents didn't call for help until the very end of this critical window. According to the official timeline provided by Malaya and Daniel, they realized sometime around 9 a.m. that they hadn't heard the children for a while. Their initial response was to conduct a search of the house, checking bedrooms, bathrooms, closets, and other areas where children might be playing or hiding. When the house search came up empty, they moved to searching the immediate property around their home. This included checking out buildings, looking around the yard, and calling the children's names in case they were nearby, but not responding. But here's the detail that has generated the most criticism. They didn't call 911 until approximately 10 a.m. That represents a full hour, 60 critical minutes between realizing the children were missing and alerting emergency services. In missing children cases, this kind of delay can be catastrophic. The mysterious silent sliding door, the explanation provided by the parents for how the children might have left the house, has become one of the most controversial aspects of this case. They claimed that Lily and Jack must have slipped out through a sliding back door that operated silently. Let's examine this claim, because it's crucial to understanding why so many people question the parents' account. First, the mechanical reality. Sliding doors by design typically create audible cues when opened. The track system, the movement of glass against frame, the change in air pressure, these all generate sounds that adults in a quiet house would normally notice. Second, the behavioral reality. For two children ages 6 and 4 to decide independently to leave their house through a back door and venture into wilderness would require either a specific motivation or a complete breakdown of the safety awareness that most children that age have been taught. Third, the timeline reality. If the children left through this door sometime between 8 and 9 a.m., they had been missing for up to 2 hours before anyone called for help. The fatal decision. Waiting to call 9. Here's where we reach the heart of what investigators and critics call the fatal mistake. When Malaya and Daniel realized their children were not in the house or immediate property, they had a critical decision to make: search longer themselves or immediately call for professional help. They chose to search longer themselves. From a parental psychology perspective, this choice is understandable. Most parents' first instinct is to solve the problem themselves, to avoid overreacting, to find their children quickly and avoid the embarrassment and drama of unnecessary emergency response. But from a missing children protocol perspective, this choice was potentially catastrophic. Search and rescue experts are unanimous on this point. In missing children cases, especially in wilderness areas, the first few hours are absolutely critical. Every minute that passes allows for a wider potential search radius, colder scent trails for search dogs, increased exposure to environmental dangers, higher likelihood of injury or exhaustion, greater difficulty for aircraft to spot small figures in dense terrain. When Malaya finally made the 911 call at approximately 10:00 a.m., she had unknowingly allowed what experts call the golden hour to slip away. Instead of beginning the search when the children had been missing for 30-45 minutes, professionals were starting their efforts when Lily and Jack had potentially been in danger for 2 full hours. The 911 call, a study in crisis communication. The actual 911 call, portions of which have been released to the media, provides insight into Malaya's state of mind and decision-making process at this crucial moment. Her voice on the call reflects genuine distress and panic. This wasn't a calm, calculated call from someone trying to establish an alibi. This was a mother who had realized that her worst fears might be coming true. But listen carefully to what she says and how she says it. There's a quality of surprised panic, as if the reality of the situation had just fully hit her. Some crisis communication experts have noted that her account lacks the kind of detailed chronology that you might expect from someone who had been systematically searching for 2 hours. Instead, it sounds like someone who had been in denial about the seriousness of the situation and was just now confronting the possibility that her children were in real danger. The life lesson: how panic paralyzes decision-making. Here's what everyone needs to understand about crisis psychology. Panic doesn't always look like screaming and running around. Sometimes panic looks like freezing, like hoping the situation will resolve itself, like being unable to accept that the worst-case scenario might be happening. Malaya's 2-hour delay appears to be a textbook example of crisis paralysis, the psychological state where we become so overwhelmed by the implications of a situation that we delay taking action, hoping against hope that the problem will somehow solve itself. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you should call for help, but you kept thinking just 5 more minutes, or maybe they'll come back on their own, or I don't want to overreact? That's the kind of thinking that can turn a manageable emergency into a tragedy. This is the fatal mistake that experts believe sealed the fate of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. A mother's very human, very understandable, but ultimately catastrophic decision to hope the situation would resolve itself, rather than immediately mobilizing professional help. By the time the 911 call was made, 2 small children had been loose in some of Canada's most unforgiving wilderness for up to 2 hours. The critical window for easy recovery had closed, and what should have been a rescue mission was about to become something much more desperate. Can you imagine being in that store, seeing this family for the last time they'd all be together? Share in the comments. Have you ever looked back at a normal day and realized it was anything but normal? Now we reach the heart of this tragic case. The decision that experts, investigators, and the public have identified as the turning point that transformed a manageable emergency into an unthinkable tragedy. At 10:07 a.m. on May 2, 2025, Malaya Brooks Murray finally dialed 911, but by then, according to missing children specialists, it may have already been too late. Understanding the golden hours in missing children cases. Before we examine exactly what went wrong, you need to understand why timing is everything when children disappear. Search and rescue professionals worldwide recognize what they call the golden hours, the critical window immediately after a child goes missing when successful recovery is most likely. Here are the facts that every parent and caregiver needs to know. In the first hour after a child goes missing, 76% of children who are going to be found alive are recovered. After 2 hours, that percentage drops to 5. After 4 hours, it plummets to 3. After 24 hours, the chances of finding a missing child alive in wilderness conditions become statistically very small. These aren't just numbers. They represent the difference between families reunited and families destroyed. They represent the difference between a scary story with a happy ending and a tragedy that haunts communities forever. So when we talk about Malaya's 2-hour delay in calling for help, we're not talking about a minor oversight. We're talking about a decision that, according to statistical analysis of thousands of similar cases, may have reduced her children's chances of survival by more than 40%. The expert analysis. What should have happened? Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a leading expert in missing children response protocols, has studied the Sullivan case extensively. Her analysis is damning. The moment those parents realized their children were not in the house, 911 should have been their first call, not their last resort. 2 small children, ages 4 and 6, loose in wilderness terrain. That's not a situation where you spend 2 hours hoping they'll wander back home. That's a situation where every minute of delay potentially costs lives. Let's break down what proper emergency response should have looked like. 9:00 a.m. Immediate assessment. Upon realizing children are missing from the house, conduct a quick but thorough search of the interior. Time limit, 10 minutes maximum. 9:10 a.m. Property search. Quick search of immediate property, calling children's names. Time limit, 10 minutes maximum. 9:20 a.m. Emergency call. If children not located, immediate 911 call to mobilize professional search resources. 9:30 a.m. Professional response. Search dogs, helicopters and trained personnel deployed while children have been missing for less than 1 hour. Instead, here's what actually happened. 9:00 a.m. Realization. Parents realize children are missing. 9:10 a.m. Extended search. Parents search house and property repeatedly, hoping children will return. 10:00 a.m. Emergency call. Finally contact 911 after 2 full hours of delay. 10:30 a.m. Professional response. Search teams deployed after children have been missing for up to 2.5 hours. That 90-minute difference in response time isn't just a statistic, it's the window that might have saved Lilly and Jack Sullivan's lives. The psychology of crisis avoidance. But we need to understand why Malaya made this fatal decision. Because understanding the psychology helps us learn how to avoid similar mistakes. Crisis avoidance is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. When faced with a situation that feels too overwhelming to handle, our brains sometimes choose to delay acknowledging the full severity of the problem. It's a defense mechanism that works in many life situations, but becomes catastrophic in true emergencies. Think about it from Malaya's perspective. That morning, she was already managing stress from single parenthood and blended family dynamics. She was in a rural area where overreacting to child behavior might seem embarrassing. She may have been thinking about the consequences of mobilizing emergency resources unnecessarily. She was likely hoping against hope that this was just children, being children, not a genuine emergency. These are all very human, very understandable thought processes. But in an emergency involving children in wilderness conditions, human and understandable can be fatal. The compounding effect of rural isolation. Here's another factor that made Malaya's delay even more catastrophic. The Sullivan family lived in an area where emergency response times were already extended due to geographic isolation. In urban areas, emergency responders can typically reach a scene within 5 to 10 minutes of a 911 call. In the remote areas of Pictou County, response times can stretch to 20 to 30 minutes or longer, depending on the exact location and current deployment of resources. This means that Malaya's 2-hour delay wasn't just 2 hours, it was 2 hours plus extended response time in an area where every additional minute dramatically reduced the chances of successful recovery. When the RCMP finally received the call at 10:00 a.m., they had to assess the situation and determine resource needs, deploy personnel from potentially distant locations, navigate to an isolated rural property, establish command and control procedures, begin actual search operations. By the time boots were on the ground conducting professional search operations, Lilly and Jack Sullivan had been missing for nearly 3 hours, well beyond the critical golden hour window. The moment everything changed. There's a specific moment in this case that haunts everyone who studies it. It's the moment around 9 a.m. when Malaya and Daniel realized their children were not in the house and had to decide what to do next. In that moment, they had a choice. Immediately call for professional help, try to handle the situation themselves. They chose option 2, and that choice may have cost their children their lives. But here's the crucial question. Was this choice made from negligence, panic, poor judgment, or something more deliberate? Investigators have found no evidence of intentional harm or malicious intent. All available evidence suggests that Malaya genuinely believed she was making the right decision, that she could find her children quickly and avoid unnecessary drama. This makes the case even more tragic, because it represents the kind of mistake that any parent could make under pressure. It's not a story about evil people doing evil things. It's a story about good people making catastrophically bad decisions in a moment of crisis. The ripple effects of delayed response. When professional search teams finally mobilized at 10:30 a.m., they faced a dramatically more challenging situation than they would have encountered at 9:20 a.m. At 9:20 a.m., they would have been looking for children who had been missing for less than an hour, in a search area with a radius of perhaps half a mile to a mile. At 10:30 a.m., they were looking for children who had been missing for up to 2.5 hours, in a search area with a potential radius of 3 to 4 miles or more. In wilderness terrain, the difference between a 1-mile search radius and a 4-mile search radius is exponential. It's the difference between a focused, manageable search operation and a massive, resource-intensive effort with significantly lower chances of success. The life lesson. Preparation prevents panic. This is where your support really matters. If this story is teaching you something important about emergency response, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The most important lesson from Malaya's fatal mistake is this. Emergency preparedness isn't just about having first aid kits and escape plans. It's about having clear decision-making protocols that kick in when panic might otherwise paralyze us. Every parent, guardian, and caregiver needs to have a clear understanding of when to call for help. Call 911 immediately. If a child is missing from your home for more than 10 minutes after a thorough interior search. A child is missing from your property for more than 10 minutes after calling their name. A child is anywhere near water, wilderness, or traffic areas and cannot be immediately located. You have any doubt about whether the situation constitutes an emergency? Don't worry about overreacting. Don't worry about being embarrassed if the child shows up after you've called for help. Don't try to be the hero who solves everything alone. Emergency responders would rather respond to 100 false alarms than miss the one real emergency, where immediate action could save a life. Malaya Brooks Murray learned this lesson too late. Her 2-hour delay in calling for help has become a textbook example of how crisis psychology can lead to fatal decision-making errors. But her mistake doesn't have to be repeated. By understanding what went wrong and why, we can all be better prepared to make life-saving decisions when crisis strikes our own families. The children who might be saved by that preparation could be our own. At 10:25 a.m. on May 2, 2025, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police issued a public alert that would mobilize one of the largest search operations in Nova Scotia history. But they were already starting from behind. 2 small children had been missing in unforgiving wilderness for nearly 3 hours. What followed was a desperate race against time that would reveal both the incredible power of community response and the heartbreaking reality of how geography and delayed action can doom even the most heroic efforts. The immediate mobilization. A community responds. Within minutes of the public alert, something remarkable happened. The quiet rural community of Pictou County, transformed into a coordinated search operation that would involve hundreds of volunteers, multiple law enforcement agencies, and resources from across the maritime provinces. Local residents dropped everything they were doing. Farmers left their fields. Shop owners closed their businesses. Parents arranged emergency childcare, all to join the search for two children they might never have met, but who had become everyone's children in that moment of crisis. Sarah McLeod, a local volunteer who participated in the search, described the scene. "I've lived in this community for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like it. People were arriving from towns I'd never heard of, with search dogs, with ATVs, with helicopters. Everyone understood that we were racing against the clock. But here's the heartbreaking reality. All of this incredible community response was happening 2 hours later than it should have been. 2 hours that might have made all the difference. The terrain, nature's perfect hiding place. To understand the challenge facing search teams, you need to visualize the landscape surrounding the Sullivan home. This wasn't a suburban neighborhood with clear sightlines and limited hiding places. This was some of Canada's most challenging search terrain. Dense woods stretched for miles in every direction, with thick underbrush that could conceal small figures from aircraft overhead. Steep banks and ravines created natural barriers that could trap or injure children who ventured too far. Hidden streams and marshy areas posed drowning risks for children who might be seeking water or trying to cool off. The forest canopy was so thick in many areas that helicopters equipped with thermal imaging couldn't penetrate to ground level. Search dogs, typically one of the most effective tools for finding missing children, faced constantly changing wind patterns and competing scents that made tracking extremely difficult. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity. While the day started clear, afternoon cloud cover, reduced visibility for aerial searches, and lingering moisture from recent rain made ground conditions treacherous for both searchers and potentially for the missing children. The professional response, every resource available. The RCMP's response to the Sullivan case was immediate and massive once they received the call. Within hours, they had deployed ground search teams with specialized wilderness training, search and rescue dogs from multiple agencies, helicopter units with thermal imaging equipment, drone operators providing aerial reconnaissance, marine units to search waterways and shorelines, specialized tracking experts who could read subtle signs in difficult terrain. Additional resources poured in from across the region. Volunteer search and rescue teams from neighboring provinces, military personnel with specialized equipment, emergency services from multiple municipalities, medical teams positioned for immediate response if the children were found injured. The scale of the operation was unprecedented for the region. Command posts were established, search grids were mapped, communication systems were coordinated across multiple agencies. Everyone involved understood that they were racing against time to find two small children in terrain that could hide them forever. The two pieces of evidence, hope and heartbreak. In the massive search operation that followed, only 2 pieces of physical evidence were discovered that might relate to Lilly and Jack Sullivan, and both would raise more questions than they answered. The blanket fragment. Near Lansdowne Road, not far from the Sullivan family home, searchers discovered a small piece of fabric that was later identified as coming from one of Lilly's blankets. The discovery generated immediate excitement among search teams. Finally, a concrete clue that might indicate the direction the children had traveled. But forensic analysis of the blanket fragment would prove frustrating. While DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Lilly, other forensic indicators were ambiguous. The fabric showed no clear signs of how long it had been exposed to outdoor conditions. Weather patterns over the previous days made it impossible to determine if it had been deposited recently or had been there for some time. Most importantly, despite intensive searching in the area where the blanket was found, no other evidence was discovered. No footprints, no additional clothing, no signs of children having passed through the area. The fragment seemed to exist in isolation, raising questions about how it had arrived at that location. The Bootprint, approximately 1 kilometer from the Sullivan home, on a pipeline trail that runs through the wilderness. Searchers discovered what appeared to be a child-sized bootprint in soft soil. The print was photographed, measured, and cast for detailed analysis. Initial assessment suggested it could have been made by a child, approximately Jack's size. and the depth and clarity of the impression indicated it was relatively recent. But like the blanket fragment, the bootprint raised more questions than it answered. The trail where it was found was accessible to children, but it would have required a significant walk through difficult terrain to reach from the Sullivan home. How would a 4-year-old have navigated that distance, and why would the children have chosen that particular direction? Moreover, despite extensive searching in the area around the bootprint, no additional tracks were found, no signs that children had continued along the trail in either direction, no other physical evidence that children had been in the area. The massive search grid, hope fading by the hour. As the search entered its second day, operations expanded to cover an area of more than 50 square kilometers. Search teams worked in coordinated grids, ensuring that every accessible piece of terrain was systematically examined. Helicopters flew predetermined patterns, their crews scanning the ground with binoculars and thermal imaging equipment. Drone operators provided detailed aerial reconnaissance of areas too difficult for helicopters to access safely. Search dogs worked multiple scent trails, though the challenging terrain and competing odors made their job extremely difficult. Volunteer teams, coordinated by professional search managers, covered thousands of acres on foot. These volunteers, many of them parents themselves, understood that they might be searching for children who could no longer respond to calls, might be injured, might be hiding in fear. The psychological toll on searchers was enormous. Many reported feeling that they were looking for needles in a haystack, that the vast wilderness could hide 2 small children indefinitely. But they continued searching because stopping felt like giving up on Lilly and Jack Sullivan. The expanding timeline. When hope becomes desperation. As hours turned into days, the search operation evolved from rescue to recovery. Statistical analysis of similar cases suggested that children surviving in wilderness conditions for more than 48 to 72 hours was increasingly unlikely, especially children as young as 4 and 6. Weather conditions became a critical factor. While temperatures were moderate during the day, nights in the Nova Scotia wilderness could be dangerously cold for children without adequate shelter or clothing. If Lilly and Jack were still alive somewhere in the search area, they were facing exposure, dehydration, and potentially injury from falls or encounters with wildlife. The emotional impact on the community was devastating. Volunteers who had started the search with optimism and determination found themselves confronting the possibility that their efforts might be too late, not because they hadn't tried hard enough, but because the search had started too late. The numbers that tell the story. By the end of the first week of searching, the statistics were staggering. Over 500 volunteers participated in search operations. More than 50 square kilometers of terrain were systematically searched. Helicopter units flew over 100 hours of search patterns. Search dogs covered hundreds of miles of potential tracks. Over 1,000 tips and potential sightings were investigated. Emergency services from 12 different agencies were involved. Despite this massive mobilization of resources and human dedication, the search had produced only 2 ambiguous pieces of evidence, and no sign of the missing children. The life lesson: community response in crisis. The search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan demonstrated something beautiful about human nature: the willingness of strangers to risk their own safety and sacrifice their own time to help children in danger. But it also demonstrated something tragic about emergency response. No amount of community goodwill and heroic effort can completely overcome the disadvantage created by delayed reporting and lost critical time. The hundreds of volunteers who searched for the Sullivan children weren't just looking for 2 missing kids. They were trying to overcome a 2-hour head start that the wilderness had gained because of decisions made in panic and confusion. Every parent, every caregiver, every community member needs to understand this lesson. The most heroic search and rescue operation in the world cannot make up for time lost in the critical first hours after a child goes missing. The volunteers who searched for Lilly and Jack Sullivan did everything right. They responded immediately, they organized efficiently, they searched tirelessly, but they were fighting against odds that had been stacked against them before they ever received the call for help. Their heroic efforts weren't wasted. They demonstrated the power of community and the value of human compassion. But they also demonstrated that in missing children cases, the most important decisions aren't made by professional searchers. They're made by parents and caregivers in the first few minutes after realizing a child is missing. And those decisions can determine whether search efforts become rescue operations or recovery mission. As the massive search operation continued with no success, investigators began focusing more intensively on the family's account of events. What they discovered was a series of inconsistencies and questionable decisions that would transform public perception of the case and place Malaya Brooks Murray at the center of a growing controversy. Sometimes the truth isn't found in grand revelations or smoking guns. Sometimes it's found in the small details that don't quite add up, the minor inconsistencies that reveal larger problems with a story. In the Sullivan case, it was these seemingly minor discrepancies that began to unravel the family's narrative. The silent door mystery deepens. The claim that Lilly and Jack had simply slipped out through a sliding back door that operated silently had raised eyebrows from the beginning. But as investigators examined this explanation more closely, it became increasingly problematic. RCMP investigators conducted detailed examination of the door in question. What they found contradicted the family's account in several significant ways. First, the door's track system was standard residential construction, the type that typically produces audible sound when opened or closed. The metal rollers moving along metal tracks, the change in air pressure when a large glass door opens, the shift in acoustics as outdoor sounds enter an indoor space. All of these would normally be noticeable to adults in a quiet house. Second, the door's location in the house meant that opening it would have been visible from several areas where the parents claimed to be active that morning. The sight lines from the kitchen and master bedroom would have allowed visual confirmation of the door being opened, even if somehow the sound had gone unnoticed. Third, and most damaging to the family's account, the door showed no evidence of recent use by small children. Fingerprint analysis revealed adult prints at appropriate heights for adult operation, but no clear evidence of children's prints at the lower positions where young children would naturally grip the door to slide it open. Forensic timeline analysis. Criminal investigators and forensic specialists began conducting detailed analysis of the family's claim timeline, looking for inconsistencies or gaps that might reveal what actually happened that morning. Phone records showed that both Malaya and Daniel had been active on their devices during the period when they claimed to be searching frantically for their children. Text messages, social media activity, and call logs suggested a level of routine behavior that seemed inconsistent with parents in genuine crisis mode. Digital forensics revealed that Malaya had been active on social media platforms during the 9:00 and 10:00 a.m. window, the hour when she claimed to be desperately searching for her missing children. Posts, likes, and comments during this period suggested someone who was distracted or upset, but not someone experiencing the acute panic that would be expected from a parent with missing children. Daniel's digital activity during the same period showed similar inconsistencies. Rather than the focused, single-minded behavior you'd expect from someone searching for missing children, his phone records showed routine activity, checking news, browsing social media, sending non-urgent text messages. The polygraph tests, cooperation and evasion. As part of the investigation, RCMP requested polygraph examinations from both parents. Their responses to this request revealed significant differences in their levels of cooperation with the investigation. Daniel Martel immediately agreed to polygraph testing and passed without any significant deception indicators. He also voluntarily provided complete phone records for the days surrounding the disappearance, banking and financial records to rule out any unusual transactions, social media account access for investigative review, permission for searches of his personal property and belongings. His cooperation was so complete and transparent that investigators quickly eliminated him as a person of interest in the children's disappearance. Malaya's response was markedly different. While she initially agreed to polygraph testing, she later declined through her legal representation. She also became increasingly restrictive about providing access to personal records and information that might help establish a definitive timeline. This difference in cooperation levels wasn't lost on investigators or the public. While declining polygraph testing is a legal right and doesn't necessarily indicate guilt, the contrast between Daniel's complete transparency and Malaya's increasing evasiveness raised questions about what she might be trying to conceal. Social media behavior, a digital trail of questionable decisions. Perhaps the most damaging evidence against Malaya's credibility came from her own social media activity in the days and weeks following the disappearance. Her online behavior revealed a pattern of decision-making that seemed inconsistent with a mother desperate to find her missing children. Most significantly, she blocked Daniel Martel on multiple social media platforms just days after the children's disappearance. This action occurred during the period when maintaining communication and coordination should have been essential for supporting the search efforts and investigation. When questioned about this decision, Malaya's explanation was vague and contradictory. She claimed it was due to personal stress and needing space, but couldn't provide a clear rationale for why cutting off communication with her partner would be helpful during a crisis involving their children. Additionally, her posts and comments during the critical first weeks of the investigation showed a concerning pattern. Defensive responses to questions about the timeline, attempts to redirect blame toward other factors, law enforcement response, search coordination, community rumors, inconsistent emotional tone that seemed to shift based on her audience, multiple deletions and edits of posts, suggesting careful management of her public image, the decision to leave, abandoning the search. Perhaps the most controversial decision Malaya made was her choice to leave the area during the active search operation, rather than remaining close to coordinate with searchers, provide additional information, or simply be available if her children were found. She chose to travel to stay with family members in another part of Nova Scotia. This decision was unprecedented in the experience of many search and rescue professionals. Captain Robert Hayes, who has coordinated dozens of missing children searches, stated, "In 25 years of search operations, I have never seen a parent voluntarily leave the search area while their children were still missing. The natural instinct is to stay as close as possible, to be immediately available if your children need you." Malaya's explanation for leaving was that she needed emotional support from extended family and couldn't handle being at the scene. While understandable from a personal perspective, this decision had several problematic implications. It removed her from immediate availability for investigative questions. It prevented her from providing real-time guidance to searchers about areas the children might have explored. It sent a message to the community that seemed inconsistent with maternal desperation. It created additional logistical challenges for investigators trying to maintain contact. The growing list of contradictions. As investigators compiled their evidence, a pattern of contradictions emerged that called the entire family account into question. Contradiction 1. Claim of immediate searching versus digital evidence of routine behavior during the search period. Contradiction 2. Claim of silent door operation versus forensic evidence of normal door mechanics and lack of child fingerprints. Contradiction 3. Claim of desperate concern for children's safety versus decision to leave the search area voluntarily. Contradiction 4. Claim of cooperation with investigation versus declining polygraph testing and restricting access to records. Contradiction 5. Claim of family unity in crisis versus blocking stepfather on social media during critical period. None of these contradictions constituted proof of criminal behavior, but collectively they painted a picture of someone whose public statements didn't align with her private actions. Expert analysis. The pattern of deception. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a criminal psychologist who specializes in family crime cases, analyzed the Sullivan case and identified what she calls classic indicators of deceptive behavior during crisis. When people are being truthful about traumatic events, their accounts tend to be consistent over time, even if they're emotional or difficult to follow. When people are being deceptive, they often create overly complex explanations for simple questions, show inconsistent emotional responses, and make decisions that seem counterintuitive for someone in genuine crisis. Dr. Walsh noted that Malaya's behavior pattern, initial cooperation, followed by increasing evasiveness, complex explanations for simple questions, and decisions that seemed to prioritize self-preservation over child recovery, was consistent with someone who had knowledge about the children's disappearance that she wasn't sharing. The community responds, from support to suspicion. As these inconsistencies became public knowledge, community sentiment began to shift dramatically. The initial outpouring of support and sympathy for a grieving mother was gradually replaced by suspicion and anger. Local resident Margaret Thompson expressed what many community members were feeling. "At first, we all just wanted to help find those babies. But the more we learned about what really happened that morning, the more questions we had. Why wouldn't a mother do everything possible to help find her children? Online forums and social media groups dedicated to the case began focusing more intensively on Malaya's behavior and decisions. While some defenders argued that people react differently to trauma and that she shouldn't be judged for not conforming to expected behavior patterns, the majority of public opinion was shifting towards skepticism about her account. The life lesson: how our actions define us in crisis. The unraveling of inconsistencies in the Sullivan case provides a crucial life lesson about integrity and transparency during emergencies. When children's lives are at stake, every decision you make will be scrutinized. Every statement you provide will be analyzed. Every action you take will be evaluated for consistency with your claimed priorities. This isn't about being perfect during crisis, it's about being honest. Investigators, search teams, and communities can work with human error, with panic-driven mistakes, with poor judgment made under pressure. But they cannot work effectively with deception, evasion, and deliberate misdirection. If you ever find yourself in an emergency situation involving children, remember, tell the truth, even if it makes you look bad. Be consistent in your account. Even if it reveals mistakes you made, cooperate fully with investigators. Even if it's uncomfortable, stay focused on the children's welfare. Even if it's emotionally difficult, make decisions based on what helps find the children, not what protects your reputation. Malaya Brooks Murray's growing pattern of inconsistencies didn't just damage her credibility, it diverted investigative resources away from finding her children and toward determining what she was hiding. In a missing children case, that kind of misdirection can be fatal. The truth might have been uncomfortable, it might have revealed mistakes she made, it might have subjected her to criticism and judgment, but the truth also might have helped find Lilly and Jack Sullivan before it was too late. Instead, her pattern of evasion and inconsistency created a situation where investigators had to solve two mysteries. Where were the children, and why was their mother not telling the whole truth about what happened? In missing children cases, there's no time for solving two mysteries. Every moment spent unraveling deception is a moment not spent finding children who might still be saved. By the third week of the investigation, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police found themselves facing a frustrating reality that haunts every investigator working missing children cases. Despite exhaustive efforts, professional expertise, and unlimited resources, they were no closer to finding Lilly and Jack Sullivan than they had been on day one. The case had evolved from an active search and rescue operation to a complex criminal investigation hampered by contradictory evidence, uncooperative witnesses, and the simple but devastating fact that two small children had vanished without a trace, in terrain that could hide them forever. The exhaustive professional response. To understand the magnitude of the investigative effort, consider the scope of resources that had been devoted to the Sullivan case. Human resources: 54 formal interviews conducted with family members, neighbors, and potential witnesses. Over 200 RCMP officers involved in various aspects of the investigation. Specialized units including major crimes, forensics, behavioral analysis, and digital forensics. Consultation with national and international experts in missing children cases. Physical evidence collection. Complete forensic examination of the Sullivan home and property. Analysis of over 500 tips and potential sightings from the public. Detailed examination of the two pieces of physical evidence, blanket fragment and bootprint. Comprehensive digital forensics of family devices, social media accounts, and communication records. Search operations. Over 75 square kilometers of terrain systematically searched. More than 300 hours of helicopter search time. Deployment of specialized search dogs from across the maritime provinces. Marine searches of all waterways within the potential search radius. Despite this unprecedented mobilization of investigative resources, the case remained exactly where it had started. Two children were missing, and no one could definitively explain what had happened to them. The ambiguous physical evidence. The two pieces of physical evidence that had initially generated hope for breakthrough in the case proved to be more frustrating than helpful as forensic analysis progressed. Lilly's blanket fragment. The analysis. Forensic examination of the blanket piece found near Lansdowne Road revealed several puzzling aspects. DNA analysis definitively confirmed the fabric belonged to one of Lilly's blankets, establishing a clear connection to the missing child. However, environmental analysis of the fabric raised more questions than it answered. Weather exposure patterns suggested the fragment had been outdoors for some time, but determining exactly how long proved impossible. The fabric showed signs of moisture exposure, consistent with recent rain, but also degradation patterns that could indicate longer-term exposure. Most significantly, the fabric showed no signs of having been torn or pulled from a larger piece. The edges were clean, almost as if the piece had been deliberately cut, rather than accidentally left behind during a struggle or rapid movement through brush. Soil analysis from the location where the fragment was found showed no other trace evidence, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no signs that children had been in the area. The blanket piece seemed to exist in isolation, raising questions about how it had arrived at that specific location. The bootprint. More questions than answers. The child-sized bootprint discovered on the pipeline trail initially seemed more promising as evidence. Detailed analysis revealed the print was consistent with a child, approximately Jack's size, and appeared to be made by a boot similar to footwear the Sullivan children typically wore. The depth and clarity of the impression suggested it was relatively recent, likely made within days of being discovered. However, comprehensive searching of the area around the bootprint yielded no additional evidence. No corresponding prints from a second child, despite the fact that Lilly and Jack had reportedly left together. No signs of children having continued along the trail in either direction. No other trace evidence indicating children had been in the area. Perhaps most puzzling, the location of the bootprint required a significant walk through difficult terrain to reach from the Sullivan home. For a 4-year-old to have made that journey would have required either unusual motivation or assistance from someone else. Soil analysis around the print showed it had been made in conditions that existed for only a brief window of time, after recent rain had softened the ground, but before subsequent weather had hardened it again. This suggested the print was made during a specific 24-48-hour period that aligned with the children's disappearance. But like the blanket fragment, the bootprint seemed to exist in isolation, providing a tantalizing but ultimately inconclusive clue about what might have happened to the missing children. The digital evidence, a trail of contradictions, digital forensics examination of family devices, social media accounts, and communication records revealed patterns that complicated rather than clarified the investigation. Malia's digital activity during the critical morning hours showed behavior inconsistent with someone experiencing acute crisis. Rather than the focused, single-minded communication pattern you'd expect from a parent with missing children, her digital footprint showed routine social media browsing during the time she claimed to be searching desperately, non-urgent text messaging with friends and family, online shopping activity that seemed inappropriate for someone in crisis, multiple deleted posts and comments, suggesting careful management of her digital presence, phone location data, which can provide crucial evidence in missing persons cases, was frustratingly inconclusive. While it confirmed that Malaya and Daniel were at their home during the morning in question, the rural location's spotty cell tower coverage made precise timing and movement tracking impossible. Daniel's digital evidence painted a different picture. His activity was consistent with someone experiencing genuine crisis, with focused communication about the missing children and none of the routine browsing behavior that characterized Malaya's digital footprint. The surveillance footage, raising more questions. The surveillance footage from May 1st showing the family together at a local store had initially seemed straightforward, proof that the children were safe and with their family until the day before their disappearance. But detailed analysis of the footage by video forensics experts revealed troubling ambiguities. In several segments of the video, the children's exact whereabouts within the frame are unclear. While they are clearly present in the store, there are moments when their precise location cannot be definitively established from the available angles. Transitions between different camera views showed gaps in coverage that made it impossible to account for every moment of the family's time in the store. While this might be normal for routine surveillance footage, it became significant when the video was being used to establish the last confirmed sighting of missing children. Most concerning to investigators, the children's behavior in the footage seemed subdued compared to witness accounts of their typical demeanor in public settings. While this could be explained by factors like illness, Lilly had been kept home with a cough, or simple fatigue, it raised questions about whether there were family dynamics at play that weren't visible to casual observers. The investigation's growing focus on family dynamics As physical evidence failed to provide clear answers, investigators increasingly focused on family relationships and dynamics that might explain the children's disappearance. Interviews with extended family members revealed a complex picture of household stress, financial pressures, and relationship tensions that might have created conditions for tragedy. While no evidence of abuse or neglect was discovered, the investigation revealed warning signs that might have been overlooked. Increasing social isolation of the family in the months before the disappearance, financial stress related to managing a household with multiple children and limited income, relationship tensions between Malaya and Daniel that may have affected household stability, lack of strong support networks that might have provided assistance during crisis. Child welfare records showed no previous reports of concern, but investigators discovered that the family had been managing multiple stressors that could have contributed to poor decision-making during emergency situations. The community investigation. Citizen detectives. As official investigation efforts seemed to stall, community members and online investigators began conducting their own analysis of the case. Social media groups dedicated to finding Lilly and Jack Sullivan attracted thousands of members who meticulously examined every detail of the case. These citizen investigators identified additional inconsistencies in the family's account, discrepancies between different versions of the timeline provided by family members, social media posts and photos that seemed inconsistent with the family situation described in official statements, witness accounts from community members that contradicted aspects of the family's narrative. While citizen investigation efforts were well-intentioned, they also complicated the official investigation by generating hundreds of additional tips and theories that had to be evaluated and eliminated by professional investigators. The psychological profile. Understanding crisis behavior. Criminal psychologists brought in to analyze the case developed profiles of how different family members might behave if they had knowledge about the children's disappearance that they weren't sharing. Dr. Michael Stevens, a forensic psychologist specializing in family crimes, noted, "The pattern of behavior we see from the mother, initial cooperation, followed by increasing evasiveness, complex explanations for simple questions, and decisions that seem to prioritize self-preservation over child recovery, is consistent with someone who has guilty knowledge about the situation." However, Dr. Stevens also cautioned that people react to trauma in unpredictable ways, and that unusual behavior during crisis doesn't necessarily indicate criminal involvement. The life lesson: when cases go cold, the Sullivan investigation's frustrating lack of progress demonstrates a harsh reality about missing children cases. Sometimes, despite unlimited resources, professional expertise, and community dedication, cases simply cannot be solved with available evidence. This reality is devastating for families, communities, and investigators who have invested everything in finding answers, but it also provides crucial lessons. The importance of immediate, accurate reporting. Every inconsistency in initial reports creates investigative challenges that can derail entire cases. The value of complete cooperation. Evasiveness and deception, even about embarrassing details, can destroy investigative effectiveness. The limitations of physical evidence. In wilderness disappearances, physical evidence is often scarce and ambiguous. The crucial nature of the first hours. Once critical time is lost, even unlimited resources may not be able to recover the opportunity for successful resolution. For the investigators working the Sullivan case, the lack of progress wasn't due to insufficient effort or expertise. It was due to the devastating combination of delayed reporting, contradictory evidence, and the simple reality that two small children had disappeared into terrain that could hide them forever. The case remained open, the investigation continued, but the window for finding Lilly and Jack Sullivan alive had almost certainly closed forever. Not because of investigative failures, but because of decisions made in the crucial first hours after they disappeared. 6 months after Lilly and Jack Sullivan vanished into the Nova Scotia wilderness, their disappearance had evolved from a local tragedy into a national case study that would influence missing children protocols, challenge assumptions about parental behavior during crisis, and leave a community forever changed by the questions that remained unanswered. The aftermath of the Sullivan case reveals how tragedy ripples outward, affecting not just the immediate family, but entire communities, emergency response systems, and our understanding of how human error can compound natural dangers to create unthinkable outcomes. The family's shattered world. For the Sullivan family, the months following the disappearance brought a cascade of consequences that extended far beyond the initial tragedy. Malaya Brooks Murray found herself not only dealing with the loss of her children, but also facing intense public scrutiny and growing suspicion about her role in their disappearance. The woman who had once been viewed as a victim of circumstance became a figure of controversy, whose every action was analyzed for signs of deception or guilt. The relationship between Malaya and Daniel Martel, already strained by the crisis, completely deteriorated under the pressure of investigation and public attention. Daniel, who had been cleared by investigators and was considered a cooperative witness, made the difficult decision to separate from Malaya and seek custody of baby Meadow. In court documents filed as part of the custody proceedings, Daniel's attorneys cited concerns about Malaya's decision-making during the crisis and her subsequent behavior as factors that raised questions about her fitness as a parent. The legal battle added another layer of trauma to an already devastated family situation. Extended family members found themselves choosing sides in a conflict that seemed to have no winners. Cody Sullivan's mother, Belinda Gray, became increasingly vocal in her criticism of Malaya's actions, while other family members argued that she was being unfairly scapegoated for a tragedy that could have happened to any family. The community's lasting trauma, the hundreds of volunteers who had participated in the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan discovered that their involvement in the case would leave lasting emotional scars. Many searchers reported experiencing what psychologists call survivor guilt, the persistent feeling that they should have been able to find the children, that they had somehow failed in their mission to bring them home safely. This was compounded by the growing realization that the search had been handicapped from the beginning by the 2-hour delay in reporting. Sarah McLeod, the local volunteer who had coordinated much of the community search effort, described the ongoing impact. You replay it over and over in your mind. What if we had started searching at 9 a.m. instead of 11 a.m.? What if we had looked in different areas first? You know intellectually that we did everything we could once we were called, but emotionally, it's hard to accept that it might not have been enough. Support groups were established for search volunteers dealing with the psychological aftermath of the unsuccessful search operation. Mental health professionals noted that the ambiguous nature of the case, with no definitive resolution, made healing particularly difficult for those who had invested themselves emotionally in finding the children. The community also struggled with questions about trust and social cohesion. The initial unity that had brought hundreds of people together for the search was gradually replaced by divisions over whether Malaya should be held accountable for her decisions, and whether the community had adequately supported the family before the crisis occurred. Changes to emergency response protocols. The Sullivan case prompted immediate and comprehensive review of missing children response protocols across Nova Scotia and other provinces with similar geographical challenges. The 2-hour delay in reporting and its potential impact on the children's survival chances led to development of new public education campaigns focused on when and how to report missing children emergencies. New protocol guidelines. Clear timelines for when to call emergency services, 10 minutes for missing children in wilderness areas. Public education about the golden hours concept in missing children cases. Improved coordination between different emergency response agencies. Enhanced training for 911 operators in assessing missing children calls. Development of rapid response protocols for rural and wilderness areas. Emergency services also implemented new communication systems designed to reduce response times in remote areas. This included pre-positioning of search resources during high-risk periods and improved coordination with volunteer search and rescue organizations. The national conversation about parental responsibility. The Sullivan case became a catalyst for broader discussions about parental responsibility, crisis decision-making, and the line between human error and negligence in child welfare situations. Legal experts debated whether parents should face criminal charges when their poor decision-making during emergencies contributes to harm to their children. Some argued that the stress and panic of crisis situations should be considered mitigating factors, while others maintained that the responsibility to protect children extends to making good decisions under pressure. Child welfare organizations used the case as an example in training programs for parents and caregivers, emphasizing the importance of emergency preparedness and clear decision-making protocols for families with young children. The case also sparked discussions about the resources available to families in crisis, particularly isolated rural families, who may lack the support networks and resources that could help them make better decisions during emergencies. The media and true crime community response. The Sullivan case attracted intense attention from true crime enthusiasts, podcasters, and online investigators who dissected every aspect of the disappearance and investigation. While this attention helped keep the case in the public eye and generated additional tips and theories, it also created challenges for the official investigation and added to the stress experienced by family members. Online forums dedicated to the case attracted thousands of participants who analyzed evidence, questioned witness statements, and developed theories about what might have happened to the children. While some of this analysis was helpful, much of it was speculative and sometimes harmful to the investigation and the family's privacy. The case became a cautionary tale about the intersection of social media, public interest in true crime, and the real-world impact on families dealing with tragedy. Lessons for other families. Perhaps the most important outcome of the Sullivan case was the lessons it provided for other families about emergency preparedness and crisis response. Key lessons identified. Immediate action saves lives. The critical importance of calling for help immediately when children are missing, regardless of embarrassment or hope that they'll return on their own. Honesty helps investigation. The crucial need for complete transparency with investigators, even about embarrassing or potentially incriminating details. Support networks matter. The importance of maintaining strong community connections and support systems that can provide assistance during crisis. Preparation prevents panic. The value of having clear emergency protocols established before crisis strikes. Geography matters. Understanding how environmental factors affect emergency response and adjusting safety practices accordingly. The ongoing impact on child safety practices. The Sullivan case influenced child safety practices and education programs across Canada and internationally. Key changes included enhanced focus on wilderness safety education for rural families, development of technology solutions for tracking children in remote areas, improved training for parents and caregivers about emergency response, better coordination between child welfare services and law enforcement, enhanced public education about the realities of missing children cases. The life lesson, how tragedy can drive positive change. While the Sullivan case remains unresolved and continues to cause pain for everyone involved, its impact on emergency response protocols, public education, and child safety practices demonstrates how tragedy can drive positive change if we're willing to learn from it. The 2-hour delay that may have cost Lilly and Jack Sullivan their lives has become a teachable moment that could save other children if parents and caregivers understand and apply the lessons learned from this case. Every family that establishes clear emergency protocols, every parent who commits to calling for help immediately when a child goes missing, every community that improves its emergency response capabilities represents a positive outcome from the Sullivan tragedy. The children we might save by applying these lessons won't make headlines because they'll be found quickly and return safely to their families. But they'll be alive because other families learned from the mistakes that may have cost Lilly and Jack Sullivan their lives. In missing children cases, the best outcome is the cases that never become major investigations, because immediate action and proper protocols prevent tragedy from occurring in the first place. That's the legacy that Lilly and Jack Sullivan deserve, not just to be remembered as victims of a preventable tragedy, but as children whose disappearance taught us how to better protect other children facing similar dangers. The economic and social costs. The Sullivan case also highlighted the enormous economic and social costs of missing children cases, particularly those complicated by delayed reporting and family inconsistencies. The search operation cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars in emergency services deployment, overtime pay for law enforcement, and coordination of multi-agency resources. The ongoing investigation continues to require significant resource allocation, with no resolution in sight. These economic realities underscore why prevention through proper emergency protocols is not just morally important, but also financially responsible for communities and emergency service systems. The social costs, including the trauma experienced by volunteers, the community divisions created by the case, and the ongoing stress on emergency responders, demonstrate that the impact of missing children cases extends far beyond the immediate family to affect entire communities. Understanding these broader costs reinforces why the decisions made in the first few minutes after a child goes missing are so crucial. The 2-hour delay in the Sullivan case didn't just potentially cost 2 children their lives, it created economic and social costs that continue to impact the community months later. This comprehensive understanding of the aftermath helps explain why emergency response experts are so adamant about immediate reporting and why the Sullivan case has become such an important teaching tool for families and communities worldwide. As we reach the end of this investigation into one of Canada's most controversial missing children cases, we're left with a tragedy that continues to haunt everyone who has studied it, not because it's unsolvable, but because it might have been preventable. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan isn't just another true crime story, it's a case study in how split-second decisions during crisis can determine whether families experience miraculous rescues or unthinkable loss. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers our children face don't come from strangers or natural disasters, they come from our own human fallibility when we're under pressure. The central tragedy, time lost forever. At the heart of the Sullivan case lies a simple but devastating reality. 2 hours. 2 hours between when the children were discovered missing and when professional help was called. 2 hours that transformed what should have been a manageable search and rescue operation into a desperate race against time that may have been lost before it began. Those 2 hours represent more than just a timeline discrepancy. They represent the difference between statistical survival and statistical tragedy. They represent the window when Lilly and Jack Sullivan were most likely to be found alive. The window that closed while their mother struggled with a decision that would define the rest of her life. We've seen how that delay compounded every challenge facing search teams. Expanding search radius from manageable to massive. Degrading scent trails that search dogs depend on. Increasing exposure time to environmental dangers, reducing chances of the children being able to respond to searchers' calls. But perhaps most tragically, those 2 hours represent a mother's very human, very understandable, but ultimately fatal mistake in judgment during the most critical moment of her children's lives. What we can all learn about emergency preparedness. The Sullivan case teaches us that emergency preparedness isn't just about having first aid supplies or evacuation plans. It's about having clear decision-making protocols that override our natural tendency to hope problems will resolve themselves. Here's what every parent, guardian, and caregiver needs to internalize from this case. The 10-minute rule. If a child is missing from your home for more than 10 minutes after a thorough interior search, call 911. Don't wait for them to come back. Don't search the property extensively first. Don't try to be the hero who solves everything alone. The geography factor. Understand your environment and how it affects emergency response. Rural families need even faster response times because professional help takes longer to arrive. Wilderness areas, water access, traffic patterns. All of these factors should influence how quickly you call for help. The honesty imperative. When you call for help, tell the truth immediately and completely. Don't worry about looking bad or revealing mistakes you made. Emergency responders can work with human error, but they cannot work effectively with deception or incomplete information. The support network. Build relationships in your community before you need them. The families who survive crises best are those who have strong support systems they can activate immediately when something goes wrong. Making better decisions under pressure. One of the most important lessons from the Sullivan case is understanding how pressure and panic affect our decision-making abilities. Malaya's 2-hour delay wasn't the result of not caring about her children. It was the result of crisis psychology that can affect any of us. Here's how to prepare for making better decisions when panic strikes. Acknowledge the panic. Recognize that feeling overwhelmed is normal during crisis, but it doesn't have to control your actions. Having predetermined protocols helps you act rationally even when emotions are overwhelming. Default to calling for help. When in doubt, err on the side of overreaction. Professional emergency responders would rather respond to false alarms than miss real emergencies. Focus on what matters most. In child safety emergencies, protecting your reputation or avoiding embarrassment is never more important than potentially saving a life. Practice emergency scenarios, like fire drills. Families should occasionally discuss what they would do if a child went missing. Making these decisions in advance helps you implement them quickly during actual emergencies. The ripple effects of our choices. The Sullivan case demonstrates how decisions made in crisis moments create ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate situation. Malaya's 2-hour delay didn't just affect her children, it affected the hundreds of volunteers who searched desperately for children who might already have been beyond rescue, the emergency responders who had to coordinate a massive operation with diminished chances of success, the community members who invested emotionally in a search that may have been doomed from the start, the extended family whose relationships were destroyed by the controversy, future missing children cases, which now benefit from improved protocols developed in response to this tragedy. Understanding these ripple effects helps us realize that our choices during crisis don't just affect us, they affect everyone who cares about us, and everyone who responds to help us. Hope for future resolution. While the Sullivan case remains unsolved, the investigation continues. New tips are still being investigated, new technologies are being applied to existing evidence, and the hope remains that someday we'll have definitive answers about what happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. But even if the case is never solved, its impact on child safety protocols, emergency response procedures, and public understanding of missing children cases has already helped protect other families facing similar crises. Every parent who now calls 911 immediately when a child goes missing, every community that has improved its emergency response protocols, every family that has established clear safety procedures represents a positive outcome from this tragedy. The most important lesson: our choices define us. Ultimately, the Sullivan case is a story about how our choices in crucial moments define not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who depends on us. Malaya Brooks Murray will forever be defined by her decision to wait 2 hours before calling for help. Not because she was evil or didn't love her children, but because she made a human error in judgment at the worst possible moment. We all face moments in our lives when our decisions have consequences far beyond what we can imagine at the time. The Sullivan case reminds us that we need to be prepared for those moments, that we need to have systems in place that help us make good decisions even when we're overwhelmed, scared, or confused. What's the most important lesson you're taking away? As we conclude this investigation, I want you to think about the most important lesson you're taking from Lilly and Jack's story. Is it the importance of immediate action during emergencies? The need for complete honesty with investigators? The value of emergency preparedness for your own family? What's the most important lesson you're taking from Lilly and Jack's story? Share it in the comments below, hit subscribe for more cases that matter, and remember, our choices in crucial moments define us. Let's make sure we're ready to choose wisely. Whatever lesson resonates most with you, commit to acting on it. Talk to your family about emergency protocols. Review your own preparedness for crisis situations. Consider how you would want to be remembered if you faced a similar test. The Sullivan case can't be changed. 2 children are still missing. A family is still shattered. A community is still haunted by what might have been. But the future can be different if we learn from this tragedy and commit to making better choices when our own crucial moments arrive. Because somewhere, right now, there's another family living their normal life, unaware that they're one crisis away from facing the same test that destroyed the Sullivan family. The lessons we take from Lilly and Jack's story might be what saves the next children who need immediate action instead of delayed decision-making. Their legacy doesn't have to be just a tragedy. It can be the wake-up call that helps the rest of us protect the children in our care when our moment of testing arrives. That's the most important lesson of all. Every day, we're not in crisis, is a day we can prepare to handle crisis better. Every choice we make to be ready, to have protocols, to prioritize children's safety over our own comfort, is a choice that honors the memory of 2 children who deserved better from the adults responsible for protecting them. The time to prepare for your family's emergency isn't after it happens, it's right now, while you still have the luxury of calm decision-making and clear thinking. Make that preparation your priority. It might be the choice that saves the children you love when their lives depend on your ability to act immediately, honestly, and decisively. Because in missing children cases, there are no second chances. There are only the choices we make in the first few minutes, and the consequences we live with forever. Choose wisely, choose quickly, choose to put children's safety first. Always. The next family facing this test might be your own. Remember to like this video if it taught you something important about emergency preparedness. Subscribe to True Crime Seat for more cases that provide crucial life lessons, and share this story with someone who needs to understand how critical timing can be in child safety emergencies. Together, we can make sure the lessons from Lilly and Jack Sullivan's disappearance help protect other children facing similar dangers.